let's start really broad, and then we'll kind of work our way in. Uh, Everybody is differentiating or bucketing their athletes, right? So like Bill's got wide and narrow ISAs. Some people would describe them as muscular versus elastic. But I know you have a specific way that you classify your athletes. So I would love to hear how you classify it and maybe some ways that the people that are listening could, you know, take your principles and then apply it to their people.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is when it comes to classifying athletes, I work with 18 athletes max on our roster, and I have other coaches that work with them too. So I'm
Yes.
functionally working with just a handful of people at any given moment,
Yeah.
which allows me to not have to classify them as much in the training. So I've kind of looked at them as an N of one, just because
Yes.
I'm not dealing with things at scale, which is a really
Yes.
important concept. I've had to deal with that in college, which requires a little bit more archetyping, labeling, and classifying. Um, so that's one. When I'm talking about archetypes, I'm 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 classifying people to help me make sense of the world around me,
Yes.
related on shows more so than I am training them in a very specific sequenced way or grouped classifications of training. So, like for me, when I speak on those things, it's less about you know Group A is doing this in the weight room versus Group B. I try to view our athletes as an individual because I just can, and it's a
Yes.
function of where I'm at. But for me, it's like I think everyone's trying to find some version of truth in classifying people and finding patterns in movement styles and training styles helps me make sense of the world around me. And I was talking to an assistant today, and I was like, it's not even about finding like truth. I think everyone for the most part is wrong all the time, and it's like over time I'm going to try to be less wrong than I
Yeah.
was before, and
Yeah.
helping learn these patterns hopefully makes me become less wrong over time. So none of the ideas of classification are like unique to me for sure. You just mentioned Bill, muscular and elastic concepts. Joel has a book on it that
Yeah.
predates me being on his podcast, and then um, you know, Altus has been classifying as mechanical and fascial movers for a long period of time. I think the interesting thing to me was that um, you know Bill has come to talk to our staff before as well, and one of the things I share with him is I like to find what is universal about what everyone is saying. In other words, what are people saying that they're saying the same thing as someone else? They're just using different words
Yes. Yes.
or a different lens by which they're seeing it through.
Yes.
And I think that's what's happening with those two concepts, kind of universally. Is a lot of people are seeing that they're saying it in different ways, but they're trying to express similar thoughts, and so they're not really unique to me. Um, I think the way in which I identify or characterize people as being muscular or elastic might be some to some degree unique to us. I talk about the movement styles they have on the court and what how they um, manifest those things. There is certainly not one single assessment that I think you can do that will tell you what this person is or isn't.
Sure.
Um, and so when I spoke with Joel, I have subsets of muscular and I have subsets of elastic athletes. Um, and the whole was, two podcasts long, so I'll be very brief in describing what those mean. But to me, once you classify someone as being muscular, you can now break him down into be like, there's varieties of muscular. It's not all like just two
Yes.
types of people. Um, we had very stiff muscular athletes who, for lack of better words, were characterized by less counter movement depth in their vertical jump. They're using really stiff strategies to move, but at the same time, they're really midfoot oriented all the time. They're high force producers, and they're good at some tasks, and they're not so good at other tasks. And we certainly have players like that. You have really pure muscular movers that are these are your more powerlifter type. That when you ask them to jump, they're going to show you a really deep and slow counter movement and then really use a concentric impulse to drive their way out of the bottom. Um, they're really midfoot oriented as well. So there's certain tasks that they excel at, and there's certain tasks that they're going to have a hard time with, and that's some version of the muscular movers. And then the elastics that I spoke to him about were um, I would call them rear foot and forefoot dominant elastic movers.
Yeah.
Where those come from, to me, and this is Bill Hartman world. So like, is the gait cycle, and you have these rear foot people that are kind of in an early, and his words would be like early propulsion.
Yep.
I'm not an expert in what he talks about, not nearly as much as other people. So I kind of put my own slang on it, and it's like these are people that are typically really comfortable in early stance. Their bodies typically, their center of mass is behind their base of support. They tend to have wild ranges of motion in rotation, specifically around their hips, and that's
Yep.
because of orientation. There's this is a low force producing position, and because of that, they're usually not like wildly. They don't excel in the weight room environment, but they excel at a lot of other things, and one of them
Yeah.
is putting on the brakes fast, and we have a lot of those in basketball. But because they have so much rotation, they tend to use those spirals a lot, and that's a characteristic of these people. And you can call them fascial, you can call them, elastic, you can whatever. But that's how I see them. And then the flip side would be the people that are on the other extreme of gait, which are kind of in toe off at all times. And these are people that I call them four-foot elastics.
Yep.
These are people that are really good at projecting their body forwards. They sometimes struggle putting on the brakes. They tend to accrue a lot of tone in their plantar fascia up their posterior chain. Their center of mass is typically out in front of them a lot. And they really excel at getting downhill quickly. And they might struggle elsewhere. And so that's how I've learned to make sense of my thoughts and seeing patterns of people, watching what they're good at, watching what they struggle with, and then trying to match training methods that either maybe work on weaknesses of theirs or maximize their strengths in some way, shape, or form. So that's four types of people that I've talked about.
Yeah.
Like I said, when I work with players, I try to view them as individual, and they all come with their own unique backgrounds and histories and values. And I try to incorporate all those things in their training. But when I'm trying to categorize my thoughts and speak them out, I think I sound insane, but that's how I try to do it.
Again, I'm going to show my age here, but I came up in an age where it was very movement focused, right? If you're not squatting, hinging, lunging, it's not valuable. And luckily, I think we've kind of come full circle on this, and we've started to appreciate the role of building muscles when we're trying to rehab somebody from an injury. So could you talk to that a little bit about like isolated, targeted tissue strengthening when somebody's coming off an injury to then build muscles, or wow, I'm really screwing this up. Building muscles, right, early on in an acute phase to then reintegrate that back into movements later on.
You can look at this from two different ways. You can look at it from structural integrity, and you can also look at it from motor learning. Okay, so you can look at it from the motor learning perspective and like considering part task versus whole task strategies. So when you talk about squatting, right, like think about like the FMS, like everyone who grew up in the early 2000s and Gray Cook popularized the FMS and the SFMA, right? Like the whole mobility stability debate, like, oh, this based on your FMS score, you need more stability, you need more mobility, and then based on your score, you would regress to this developmental position, whether it was rolling, half kneeling, quadruped, right? All these progressions.
Yep.
The same principle of regressions based on part task strategies, local joint activities, isolated exercises to then integrate that back into the whole movement. Because the thing you have to remember with an injury is structural integrity was compromised at some level. And then with that, you're balancing the experience with pain, which everybody's experienced with pain, the emotional response to that, the physical response to that. Everyone has a unique pathway with that. And so by integrating some of these localized tissue qualities, these localized exercises, what you're doing is you're teaching the body it's okay to load this tissue again. And if you try, I'll put my hand up and say, I've done this. I've had a post-op knee before where I've tried to build strength through global movement patterns. And then we realize this just isn't working. We have to go in locally and just focus on part task, single joint exercises. Although like you know me, Mike, I love movement. I love
Yeah,
systems
absolutely.
thinking. Like I want to get that. But when you have this injury, sometimes the body, you have to override that, or you have to teach the body, hey, it's okay to load this again. It's okay to move this again. Sometimes
Yes.
I have to use my hands and I have to show them. That's what passive range of motion is. That's what active
Yes.
assisted range of motion is. I'm helping you ride the bike by putting the training wheels on. Ultimately, I want to take those training wheels off, or I don't want to have to show you how to ride the bike, and you go and ride the bike and do the exercise yourself. But sometimes we need those exercises to give confidence to the athlete, put local stress into the tissue, and then be able to build that part back up to an adequate level where that will not be a weak link. So from a motor learning perspective, or like a cognitive, if you want to even call it a neural perspective, that's important there. That's how to tie that. From a true, like you were talking about, hypertrophy phase, like let's use the classic example of an ACL and a quad. Like their quad atrophy happens fast.
Yeah.
And so
Crazy.
you're not going to be able to run, jump, and change direction effectively if your quadricep is not at an adequate level of strength. Period. Like hard stop. If you're not achieving 100% body weight, peak torque on an isokinetic test, and you're not achieving 120% of that on eccentric qualities, your quality of running, your quality of jumping, and your force plate metrics, you're going to see something. So skipping those steps just to get back to functional movement, just to get back to running, jumping, change direction, because a surgeon said you can start running at 3 months, but your asymmetry and isokinetic is 50%. It's like, whoa. There's almost like this false sense of, I'm going to be great at my job if I can get you back running and jumping faster. But the reality is, like, don't skip the steps of improving the quality of the parts before you start chasing the qualities of the whole.
Yeah. I love it, man.
So we're going to do things really, really well. And we're going to pay attention to detail. You guys are going to feel good after that. And I think that's another
Huge.
thing. When they come in, I'm like, where are we at? They give me a scale. When they leave, I ask the same thing, where are we at? And, 8.5, 9 times out of 10, they always feel better leaving.
Yeah.
Always my goal.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it's definitely been a shift, and I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I love it too. Okay, so what do you see the role of a S&C or sports performance coach playing in an athlete's development?
So actually we do have a freshman right now who has never stepped foot in the weight room. She is 6'3", just absolutely yoked up, extremely strong on the court, but could not hold a split squat for longer than maybe 10 seconds.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Came in with severe knee pain, shocker, back pain, shocker, ankles all jacked up, you name it. So first thing I do is actually have one-on-one meetings with each student athlete. So that takes anywhere from 30 to an hour. I'll schedule that. Obviously, I have to say it's optional. It's optional if you'd like to come. Would love for you to come.
Yeah.
So we schedule time, sit down with them. I listen to what they have to say. So what do you want to see? What are your goals in basketball? What are your goals in the weight room? What do you want to work on? What are you bad at? Nutrition as well. And then that kind of gets us talking about what I think they need. Because I can already tell, like the first probably 3 times I see them, like the interaction of what is actually happening. I've also watched film on each athlete with the staff.
Yeah.
So like when I first got there, they sat me down and I watched about 2 hours of film of each athlete. Coaches ran me through what they felt they need. I watched, kind of gave my input on what I thought they needed as well, how we were going to get there, and kind of the duration of how long it's going to take. I think not prefacing that it is a process and that's not going to get done can be misleading at times, because all of a sudden we're 3 weeks in and it's like, why is this athlete not there yet?
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, my staff understands, and they're like, I know it's going to take a while. She will be your project / your best friend, do what you will.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right. So after I kind of had that conversation, watched that film, talked to the athlete, essentially I believe that we're not going to skip any steps. We're going to go through it. If you want to transfer and you don't know how to hang clean, that strength coach can come talk to me, cuss me out. Why didn't you teach her how to hang clean? Hey, she couldn't even hold the body weight squat. Like, there's no way I'm hang cleaning her.
Right.
Period. You can go ahead and have fun with that. So it's a very, very rudiment, very basic progression. How not to use your knees when you jump, how to use your quads and your hamstrings and your calves, how not to let yourself pronate and roll in, how not to just continue to like anteriorly tuck your hips every time you run. She didn't know how to decelerate. I don't know how,
Yeah.
like she did not know how to decelerate. She didn't know how to cut. She would just create a circle. And so I was like, all right. So about every other day she came in and we worked separately on acceleration and deceleration work. As simple as just stepping off a box,
Yeah.
and then kind of progressed into like court drills and progressed into like cutting off a screen, setting a screen, rolling off, and just every single day or every other day we're just building, asking the coaches, hey, can I get a coach out here? Can I get a practice player out here to kind of help me out and kind of roll? Because there's no way I'm holding her down. There's no way.
I was going to say you're not out there just locking her down.
Oh my goodness, she would just boom, trample me. There's no way.
Body, yeah.
So from that perspective, from a freshman, and I honestly treat all the freshmen like that. You could tell me you were with a trainer, and that's awesome. And I'm sure they did a great job. I just have we probably have different language. We probably have different expectations.
Yes.
So they are on a very rudiment, very basic strength conditioning program that is going to set the foundation for what they need come their sophomore, junior, senior year. Because I need to make sure we move well and we move often. And then from there, when I know I can trust you and I don't have to keep my eyes on you the whole time, then we can kind of progress into other needs. Now, when season comes, will probably change pending how much time they get on the court.
Yeah.
But, for now, we're just keeping it very simple, very basic. This is also the athlete that said this ish works because her knees stopped hurting. And I was like, it's just crazy. What happens when you don't use the joint? And so, it's been a cool progress, and that buy-in's been awesome. And, understanding that we're just going to do basic things very, very well. And honestly, that's exactly what Stanford does from a basketball perspective, which I appreciate. Like every single day they're doing their, 10, 20-minute warm up is the exact same thing from a basketball ball handling, passing, shooting standpoint.
Yeah. You got to lay the foundation. And I think maybe the most important takeaway here, regardless of what level you work at, is the fundamentals are important. Building the foundation is important. And just because somebody is a high level basketball player doesn't mean that they move incredibly well, right? So don't assume that just because they can get buckets on the court that they can squat, hinge, split squat, push up the way that we would like. So the way I try and describe that is, look, this is like untapped potential, right? Like you alluded to, if every time she goes in and she does a split squat or a lunge, her pelvis is diving forward, she's overpronating, right? She's getting this massive valgus or IR, whatever you want to call it. Hey man, like if we fix that, not only is that less knee pain in this athlete's case, but on the performance side, now you're building a better set of brakes. So you're going to make them faster coming in and out of those cuts. So I think that's something that's really important, because I think a lot of times when people are working with young basketball players, they assume, oh man, if you're at the top, you're like doing all the cool stuff. It's like, no, just because they're a high level competent mover on the court doesn't mean that they are incredibly competent in the weight room.
Yep. And it's funny because everyone's like, she's so strong. So they're giving her like 50 pounds for bench. And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. No.
And she literally gets the 20s, 25s and is shaking like 8 reps. And I'm just like, and it's very different. And that's A-okay. And there's no need to rush the process, because I'm sure in about a year she'll be touching the 50s.
Absolutely.
But we need to build the foundation. She needs to understand what this feels like, and she's going to be extremely sore tomorrow. So,
yeah,
that
too. Yeah. The first time you do anything new, just respect the fact you will be sore the next day.
Yep.
So never forget
she was
that.
very surprised at that soreness, but it soon subsided, and she was just rocking and rolling. So it's been awesome.
Something that we talked about in our last show, but I'm not sure people are still getting the message on this. So I want to circle back and talk about it again. Can you please explain why lifting heavy weights does not equate or equal your zone 2 work? Because I still get plenty of people that are like, oh yeah, I go in the gym and, I average out to 130 or whatever. And what'd you do? I just lifted the whole time.
Yeah.
So can you please break that down for the people that consider their strength training their zone 2?
Well, look, I think we have to first define, like, what are we talking about when it comes to zone 2? Because if all you're talking about in zone 2 is just this heart rate range, then yeah, anything can possibly get you. A sauna can get you into zone 2, but
sure,
is sitting in a sauna going to make you an endurance athlete? Probably not. No. Because there are very big differences. So when we're talking about zone 2 from a cardiovascular health standpoint, we're talking about developing the slow twitch muscle fibers to oxidize fat more effectively. We were talking about the cardiovascular system itself and the heart expanding and dilating as a result of prolonged time under basically higher levels of workload that cause the heart left ventricle to stretch a bit. And we're talking about ways that are pathways, I would say, that are just developing metabolic efficiency is the best way to put it. And that's an aerobically driven process. We're talking about cardio. When we just to back up here, generally speaking, we talk about cardiovascular anything. We're talking about the aerobic system, because the cardiovascular system is what's driving the flow of oxygen to our tissues, and then the tissues take up and produce energy aerobically. So we talk about cardiovascular fitness, we're talking aerobic development. Those two are linked. We're not really talking about cardiovascular system and power output, right? Your cardiovascular system is not the limiting force there in how much you can lift in the anaerobic side. It's not the limiting factor in your sprint speeds. So cardiovascular fitness means doing things that are developing the cardiovascular system. So zone 2 in that respect is what I mentioned. It's a level of power output where we are primarily using slow twitch muscle fibers, and we're primarily getting better at oxidizing fat while developing the cardiovascular system in the way that's mentioned, where the heart adapts and what we call eccentric hypertrophy that makes it possible to pump more blood and oxygen, which again improves cardiovascular fitness. What does lifting weights do? Lifting weights makes you stronger, helps you build muscle and bone density, and it builds the anaerobic pathways, because the vast majority of energy produced during lifting weights is without oxygen. It's anaerobic, right? That's because you're producing in such high levels of force and power, the aerobic system can't produce much of it, and so most of it comes from the anaerobic side. So when we're lifting weights, our heart rate is driven not necessarily by the demand for oxygen, but by the increase in sympathetically driven hormones, adrenaline and noradrenaline, all these sorts of hormones that get increased as a result of trying to produce so much force, and they attach to our fast twitch muscle fibers and they help produce more force. But it's not this direct link between our heart rate and our oxygenation and our demand for oxygen and our cardiovascular system working the same way. They're very different things. So in a nutshell, when you are lifting weights, you are training anaerobically, you are at high blood pressures, you are having to do things that create energy anaerobically, and you're using your fast twitch fibers in addition to your slow twitch fibers. You're burning almost no fat, because as you are sympathetically deriving those hormones, you are inhibiting fat at the same time, because fat cannot be broken down fast enough to produce the force you need. So how can we possibly increase what we're talking about? Slow twitch muscle fibers using fat, the cardiovascular system adapting in a way to increase cardiovascular fitness by lifting weights and doing something that's not stimulating either one of those. You can't, all right?
Yeah.
So lifting weights serves a very important purpose, but it is not building cardiovascular fitness. Now, if you are coming off of the couch, then sure, just moving and lifting and being active is going to increase cardiovascular fitness to some extent, because something is better than nothing, and lifting does, have increased blood flow versus the couch. But no endurance athlete built their endurance by lifting weights. Like it's just not the same thing. And it's the same thing. I'm not going to go for a bunch of cardiovascular low intensity zone 2 work and then increase my squat, right?
Right.
That's just not going to happen, because we're talking about very different things. So again, long story short, use the tools for what they are designed for. Strength training is designed to build strength and hypertrophy and bone density and all those things we've talked about. Cardiovascular work is going to develop the cardiovascular system. And we look at zone 2, we're talking about heart rates that are driving the slow twitch muscle fibers to get better oxidizing fat. And that does not happen when you're lifting weights. That's just a very different pathway. So that's not a short story. It's a long story, but that's the story.
Okay. 21 years in, I would love to hear, what are the biggest gaps that we can fill as performance coaches to help our collegiate players jump higher?
Oh. Man. All right. I mean, this will probably be your clip for the.
Oh, let's go.
We need to stop putting so much emphasis on the weight room.
I love it.
I
couldn't agree more, but go ahead.
I think college, the college game is different, right? Like, you can look in some of the people that I referenced earlier, like, they've got some of the biggest, strongest, baddest dudes in the country, and there's a reason they're good, and part of it is that they're the biggest, strongest, baddest dudes in the country.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is what they do with it. But if we're simply talking about how we can get them to jump and have greater outputs, I think we rely too much on just continually improving max strength. and not enough on teaching the body to move efficiently. And listen, we lift 4 to 6 days a week all year, even in season. I'll probably have a third to 2/3 of my team that'll lift on game day.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not saying we don't lift weights. I'm not saying you shouldn't lift weights. I'm not saying you shouldn't lift heavy stuff. I'm not saying that there isn't a time, a place, and a value to it. I'm just saying we might do it a little too much.
Yeah.
You know, like everybody that's listening to this probably knows like that I'm the 1x20 guy. Like,
Yeah.
I've got a dude who's 6'11", 260 pounds, who can trap bar deadlift 405 for 20 reps.
Oh my
I
Lord.
don't think he needs to get much stronger than that. You
No.
know, like what else do you need to do? Like, and I'm not going to say that there is a strong enough. I'm not saying that there's a point where we cut things off. Because if I told this cat that he couldn't lift weights, he would punch me in the face. You know, like he loves being in the weight room. But like, eventually you need to sit there and talk to these kids about like, bro, like that bucket's pretty full.
Yeah.
Like, and we do that, Mike, like with our guys. Like one thing that I've had probably the most fun with, and it's probably hurt my feelings the most too, but it's made me a much better coach. It's like we do exit interviews every year and go through like what they think works.
Yeah.
What's good for them, what wasn't working, what they didn't understand. And then we also give them 3 slots week 1 in the off season that now turns into like almost 2/3 of the workout. That's individual selection.
Mm.
And we started out simply with answer 3 questions, bros. What do you love to do? Put that in there. Get after it because you're gonna.
Right.
What do you absolutely suck at? Because if you're bad at it, you probably need to get better.
Yes.
And then what is one thing that you can come up with that could improve your game?
Mm.
Do those 3 things. And then after that, we add a couple more spots and it's like, so how is this working? How's that working? What direction are we going? And listen, man, metrics are great. I mean, we look at all the numbers.
Right.
We look at our force plates. We look at our heart rates in practice and during conditioning. And we look at our outputs during the season with VBT and all that. But you know what? Every time it works, it does. And if you believe in it, it's going to work. And giving these guys the opportunity to be like, I like this because it's not like I like to do curls because it makes me feel good. It's, hey, so I like loading a lateral squat in a Zercher position because I really feel like it keeps me square.
Yep.
Awesome. Problem is, it hurts my elbows. Well, what if we go with the kettlebells in a rack? Let's try that. I like that, but what if we did, instead of 2, I did 1, and I just held it in one arm so that I can't turn? Sure. You know, giving them the opportunity to do those things and build out with that allows them to continue to train and stay in, keeps them bought in, and it gives them the ability to, I don't like the word, but like fix the issues that they see. So yeah, kind of a roundabout way, just like there's some power and some necessity to lifting heavy for younger people.
Yep.
But I think we maybe do a little too much of it when it comes to power outputs.
Yeah.
I have a lot of high school kids where they're just not physically big and strong enough to play, especially as they go from the high school to the collegiate level. So I would love to hear from you. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen when people are trying to bulk up or add a little bit of muscle?
Yeah, I think we could probably head back to the answer to the first question. And the first one would just be the total, right? Getting sufficient energy intake to help assimilate the growth of new muscle tissue. You know, it's not a particularly easy process. You know, obviously, again, if you're a novice, you can pretty much do anything and you're probably going to be pretty successful. But without sufficient daily energy intake, it's going to be pretty hard to, you know, kind of really support that physical training to get the outcomes that you want. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, athletes will oversleep, they may skip meals, they may miss a feed. You know, that consistency piece is really important if muscle growth or adding body weight is a goal, because even just missing one feed for the day with such high energy expenditure, it's pretty hard to make up, and there's only so much you can eat in one sitting. And then you're already behind the 8 ball for the rest of the day. I would say with that, quite often I think it is protein just becomes associated with muscle. And there becomes a hyper focus on, well, if I want to grow muscle tissue, I need more protein. And the diet becomes centered around protein. And while, good in principle, again, a lot of the research shows that, getting sufficient protein, provided, calorie intake is adequate at around that 1.6 grams per kilo, which, for the US listener is somewhere between 0.7, 0.8 grams per pound, is sufficient for maximizing muscle growth. And, obviously, if we ramp up the protein super high in the diet, typically that's at the expense of other macronutrients. Now, for athletes, obviously, if we're in the weight room looking to build muscle tissue, and we're leading on carbohydrate, but a lot of times athletes aren't solely just in the weight room. And, whether they're getting on court afterwards, whether they're getting on the practice field, having sufficient energy to be able to fuel their training, but ensure their intake is sufficient to kind of support that muscle growth and, achieve, a slight positive calorie balance. If you're cutting a load of carbohydrate and fat out of the diet just to ramp up protein intake, you're probably going to be pretty unsuccessful there. And I would say finally that kind of peri-workout period, again, we touched on it a little bit with the timing. It's amazing to me how many athletes, especially in the college space, would show up, for a training session or a weight room session and not have eaten anything, right? Yes. I can go in and hit a 45-minute lift fasted and I'm probably going to be okay, right? But for an athlete to come in, hit a pretty intense lift for an hour and then immediately step out, on court or on the practice field, we kind of really, missing a big window there where
absolutely,
again, when we speak about the periodization piece and amplifying any adaptation and performance, we've really missed a big window there. And now even you could have a 3-4 hour period pass where you haven't had any intake of any food, and again, that would lead you all the way back to the energy intake. It's pretty hard to make that up. So making sure that you're fueling sufficiently before training. Again, I know a lot of athletes struggle with that, but it doesn't have to be a substantial meal. Even if we're just taking on board some carbohydrates, a little bit of protein before a session, and then we would make that recovery period a little bit more immediate, even if we were taking on some liquid calories in the form of a shake, and then following it up that with a meal, pretty soon after. If the goal is to increase lean mass or, assimilate some tissue there, really want to be taking advantage of that peri-workout period.
If I got a young athlete, I'm thinking development. If I'm training a pro, then I'm almost breaking the off season down into phases. And I'm just going to preface this by saying at some point, like in the next couple of months, this is going to be an IBI post. Like this is going to be a full premium post, because I think this is where people really make some mistakes. I think too often, especially say you get your first pro in, you're like, oh man, I'm going to get in my S&C bag here and I'm going to throw all this stuff at them. And yeah, it looks cool. And maybe it even feels okay early on, but by the time the season rolls around, they're already feeling beat up again, right? Or some of those aches and pains are already flaring up. And if they're having issues in the preseason or early on in the competitive year, dude, I hate to tell you, they are going to be struggling. By the time March, April, May comes around, they are not going to be feeling great. So for me, I tend to break that off season down. Kind of that first block is really just getting them right and getting back to training. So for instance, my guys that have gone overseas, some of them literally left. Keelan left August 7th, and he may not get back until the end of May or early June. So, I mean, just do the math on that. That's a 10-month competitive season. So the first thing I'm trying to do is just make sure that they feel good again. So I'm thinking about getting them right, getting back into training. I'm thinking about working on deficiencies. And so that's where this really thorough assessment comes into play, and it's continuing to evolve. And, now it's beyond just the movement stuff, but I'm looking at their their force plate data. I'm looking at their true strength stuff, which I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around now. But I'm having the ability to do more isolated strength testing, so we can really dive in and say, okay, what's their quad strength? What's their soleus strength? So we can really find those weaknesses and deficiencies and start to iron those out before we get back into full-blown training. And so really, if you've only got somebody 8 weeks, it could take 4 to 5 just to get to a point where they feel pretty good. And then at the end, it's like, okay, now we're just trying to top those outputs back off. So I'm not necessarily trying to take their vertical jump up from their old standard, but I'm at least trying to get back to their old standard, trying to get them back to baseline so they can go and have another solid year, right? Ultimately, the goal is each and every year, if you're not improving performance outputs, which is kind of sad for us, but if you're getting them back to that baseline, they feel healthy, they feel strong, their outputs are back where they need to be, hey man, they're set and ready to go have another good year. And the way this game goes is, hey, the longer you can stay in the game, the more money you can make, the better opportunities you have. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to add longevity to these guys' careers so they can play as long as they want and they can maximize their earning potential. So like I said up top, Vicky, this is a great question. I'm going to do a whole video on this because I think it's worth it. And I think it's worth helping people understand, like, this is exactly my thought process and how I go about doing it. But from like a 30,000 foot view, that's kind of my approach. So I really hope that helps. Great question. Okay. What's the value in having good, better, and best pricing options for your members?
So a lot of people don't watch TV, and I don't watch a lot, but a lot of the things I do is I try to consume different TV that's going to help me grow. And one of the shows I love to watch is called The Prophet. Have you ever watched that show? It's on. It's a phenomenal show, but it's this guy named Marcus Lemonis, and he goes into struggling businesses, and then he's a business guy, and he goes and he turns the business around. It's a phenomenal show. Every person that owns a business should watch this show. Okay. And I was watching an episode of him doing like a drum set, and it was like a drum company. And what he did is they only had one drum. And what happened was they would either buy the drum or they wouldn't buy the drum. Right? And he's like, well, why do we only have one drum? Why don't you have multiple drums? Don't some high-level drummers need more than one drum? And so he created this process called good, better, best. This is where I originally learned it from, where he's like, all right, let's create the mecca of drums. That could be for a professional drummer, that's someone that would come in and that would need all this truck, all the bells and whistles and all the stuff. And then we have like a bass drum for like maybe a drummer that's a beginner that only needs one drum and they're just learning. And then let's have a mid-tier one for like the novice, the intermediate drummer that needs like, the basics, right? And so it's the same thing for fitness. Like not everyone is going to work out and do, everything that you've got. They're not going to do your nutrition program. They're not going to do one-on-one training combined with small group. Like they may not have a lot of time to do it. Maybe they only got twice a week to be able to do it. So I like a good, better, best option to be able to have some variation on price within the target market that you're after. Because it's like, then it becomes yes or no. Right? Yeah. Instead of yes, and we could do this, and we could do this. Yeah. And then what the good, better, best also does is provide upsell opportunities. So for example, let's say your mid-tier, your better is twice a week. Yep. Right. And that's $300 a month. Well, now you can get them in the door at that $300 mark, and then they're doing really well and they're loving the culture. You can go to them 3 months later and be like, hey, you're kicking butt, but do you want to take it up a notch? Let's take it up. Why don't you sign up for the 4-day-a-week option for a month and see how you like it? Yeah. And just go do that for a month and see. And then we'll meet afterwards and see if it's the right fit and see if you want to keep it. Like you have that opportunity with every one of your clients right now if you have that good, better, best pricing option. So, I mean, here's the thing. It's not new. What does Mercedes have? The 3 Series, the 6 Series, the 7 Series. Right? Yeah. They all are doing it in some sort of variation. The car wash is really good at it, right? You have the basic, the deluxe, and the plus, the and ultimate, all of that, right? It makes sense, right? Because there's some people, and this is why it's important to have the best. there's always people out there that will buy the highest thing you got.
Yes. Yes.
But if you don't offer it, they will not buy it. And usually it's about 20% of the people will buy the highest option. That's usually the statistic. And it's funny. I told you I have around 129 mastermind members. We have a high level mastermind called the CEO mastermind.
Okay.
And we have just about 20%, almost to the number, that are enrolled in that group. It's so weird how it happens. But if I don't offer that, no one goes in it.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's just about putting it on the price sheet.
Yeah. So how do you know when somebody has taken an adaptation too far?
Yeah, great question. I think I mentioned a little bit before is, with experience, you start to understand these things a little bit more. So in baseball, we talk a lot about pitchers that are using these insane connective tissue, like they're bending through connective tissue and all the way to bone to create these shapes and positions, right? Especially some pitchers. So the best example of all time is like Tim Lincecum. Remember him back in the day, the freak for the Giants? Think of how hard he corkscrewed around that back hip. And he's literally he's cranking on connective tissue as hard as he could, right? Yeah. And he'd get the pelvis turning that way so hard. And he's a narrow ISA with great rotational capabilities till eventually he hit the constraint of that turn, which was his hip labrum, right? Which, prevented him from doing it further down the road. So it's like you start to see these patterns where you have, I think, a better idea of when these strategies are pushing too hard, right? So, I have one of my former guys, Spencer Strider, with the Braves, who's 5'11", and he's been up to 102 miles an hour. For him to create that type of energy at his size, he's bending the hell out of stuff. And he has this fastball that carries. It doesn't sink much, so it's got this nice approach angle. But he's kind of leaping out of the backside, landing with a late arm, then climbing the elbow like crazy and creating this massive wave of posterior lower compression that's delivering the ball and this massive connective tissue stretch and storage. But there's a shelf life on that. And actually he's blown out his UCL twice now, right? But and for a small guy like that, he's going to have to do things like so. There's also these things in place. You understand the guys and gals that need these to a certain degree to perform. But I think you use evidence you've seen from other athletes you've worked with, where you start to get a better sense of when this is starting to push too far, right? Yeah. Baseball may be a change in a spin rate or a movement profile or those types of things. But, these are complex systems. We don't, we're still.
It'd be great if there was this very clear point, we're getting too close here.
So here's a cool one. I was actually, this is the random stuff I think about at 1 o'clock in the morning when I can't sleep.
I love it. I'm here for
the Olympics. I was watching Simone Biles. I was like, gosh, man, so impressive what she's doing at this age as a gymnast too. I'm like, well, what's allowing her to do? And I'm sure she's a pro's pro, and her approach to training, how she takes care of herself. But there's got to be more to it than that. And I think what it is, because with gymnasts you deal with a lot of lower back stuff and knees and Achilles and those types of things. Is she has the most perfect configuration for the sport, where it's this wider thorax that really funnels into her pelvis. So and you see her when she lands, how much anterior orientation she's in. But I think because of the gift of her configuration of her thorax and pelvis, is she can pressurize bottom up so well. She doesn't have to drive some of these strategies through the distal femur, through the tibia, through the foot that wrecks a lot of other gymnasts. Because what she's doing is just, my goodness, to be 27 as a gymnast. Yeah, she looks like she's jumping higher than she ever has.
And did you see the thing the other night when she's on the ground exercise and it shows her head and she's at 11.8?
Yes, it is.
That's wild, dude. She can't be taller than 5 foot, so she's got to have her feet 6.5, 7 feet in the air, bro.
Insane. Yeah. But it's And nothing I'm sure she's the hardest worker, and mentally to do what she does with the pressure she has is absolutely amazing. But I think that physical gift of her structure has allowed her to perform with that degree of orientation for that long. Where somebody it's kind of like a little wider hips, there's going to be some more distal femoral, proximal tibial stuff going on, L5, S1, where it's took the perfect mindset of an athlete, work ethic with this perfect structure to be able to hold on to the orientation strategies that gymnast needs for that long has been just so cool to watch.
We're in an interesting position as a support staff in whole because of the fact that I don't have any decision making over basketball to them, right? They're getting paid to play basketball, and I don't have any, like, I'm not starting or benching players. I'm not deciding how many minutes they play. I'm not going over schemes with them on offense or defense. Those things are not in my wheelhouse, and so we have a certain level of relationship that essentially makes us. I was actually talking to one of our rookies about this the other day. It essentially makes us a coworker with them rather than a coach with them, right? I have their interest in mind. I'm treating them individually. We both recognize that this person is part of a team, so we all need to work together. We all have like some of the goals for each individual player are not, from an organizational standpoint, are not necessarily their individual goals. Those might not be things that they want to work on, but I have to balance what the organization wants, what the player wants, what I see being, an important piece for us to program around, and the combination of that thing, I think, is what, and the understanding from each department about what that means, I think, is what kind of propels an organization forward. Is that we're going to treat you like an individual. We both understand that this is a team sport, so you have to melt into that a little bit. You have to lean into that and have that be a strength for you. But everything that you're dealing with outside of here is outside of here. That's not, this is the time where you're going to, I hope that you feel that I am treating you, thinking about what you're doing and actually programming well enough for you to get better in here. And let's take that as a win.
Yeah.
That's all I need.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it.